Welcome to Legal Avenue Deep Dive, the podcast that takes you beyond the headlines and into the heart of fascinating legal battles. Don't forget to subscribe to Counsel Ram's YouTube channel for even more deep dives into the world of law. I'm Big Dave, your guide to unpacking these complex cases.
And I'm Cypher, here to help you connect the dots and see the bigger picture.
Today, we're taking you straight to Uganda, where a conflict within the legal profession has erupted into a full-blown constitutional crisis.
It all centers around the Uganda Law Society, or ULS. It's kind of like the Bar Association for Ugandan lawyers. They're tasked with upholding professional standards and advocating for a fair and independent legal system.
This is pretty straightforward, right?
Well, things get complicated when you bring in the Attorney General, Kiryowa, Kionuka, Nsumikumbi Mugambe, and the Solicitor General. They're basically the top legal advisors to the government.
And here's where the sparks start to fly. The ULS is accusing the Attorney General of some pretty serious misconduct, including things like conflicts of interest and interfering with court cases.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit.
The ULS claims that in one case, the Attorney General was representing a company while simultaneously acting as Attorney General, which raises questions about whose interests he was really serving.
It's a classic conflict of interest scenario, and it gets even more tangled when you consider that the Attorney General, by default, holds a position on the ULS Council. They call it an ex officio position, meaning it comes with his government job.
So imagine you're a lawyer in Uganda, and the person you're supposed to answer to might be playing both sides of the field. It's no wonder the ULS is crying foul.
And they didn't stop at just complaining. In an unprecedented move, the ULS actually issued an executive order expelling the Attorney General and Solicitor General from their council.
That's a bold move, and it really underscores the depth of this conflict. They're essentially saying, we don't trust you to uphold the integrity of our profession.
This is a battle for the soul of Uganda's justice system, and the stakes couldn't be higher.
And there's more. The ULS is alleging that the Attorney General interfered with court cases by overturning awards to war debt claimants and meddling with appointments to crucial legal bodies like the Judicial Service Commission and the Law Development Center.
These actions, if true, paint a troubling picture of someone potentially trying to exert undue influence over the legal process.
The ULS also claims that the Attorney General made accessing the Uganda Law Reform Commission's digital platform more difficult by imposing a fee. They argue this hinders access to justice, especially for those who can't afford it.
It's like putting a price tag on legal information. And it raises questions about whether the Attorney General is prioritizing transparency and public access to the law.
In response to all of this, the Attorney General has come out swinging, denying any wrongdoing, and accusing the ULS of launching a personal attack and misinterpreting the law.
He claims that his actions are perfectly legal and that he's simply carrying out his duties as Attorney General.
So we're left with two completely different narratives here. The ULS sees a pattern of behavior that threatens the independence of the judiciary, while the Attorney General insists he's acting within the bounds of the law.
It's a classic he said, she said situation, but with the fate of Uganda's legal system hanging in the balance.
And this isn't just some abstract legal debate. It has real-world implications for the people of Uganda. But before we dive into that, let's take a closer look at some of the specific allegations against the Attorney General, particularly the ones that raise serious human rights concerns.
Right, because the ULS is claiming that the Attorney General has not only condoned torture, but also actively undermined the right to bail. These are incredibly serious accusations. Torture is a violation of fundamental human rights. And if a country's top legal official is condoning such practices, that's a major red flag.
Exactly. It raises questions about the government's commitment to protecting its citizens' basic rights. And it gets even more concerning when you consider the allegations about undermining the right to bail.
The right to bail is a cornerstone of any justice system that values due process. It's the idea that you shouldn't be held in prison indefinitely without being convicted of a crime.
But the ULS is claiming that the Attorney General has imposed restrictions on bail applications that go against these principles.
And that raises concerns about whether people are being denied their fundamental right to a fair trial.
Now, it's important to note that the Attorney General vehemently denies these allegations. He insists that the government does not condone torture, and that anyone accused of a crime is entitled to due process.
He's basically arguing that the ULS is taking his words out of context and misrepresenting his actions.
But here's where it gets really interesting for me. Both sides are claiming to be acting in the best interest of the law and the Ugandan people. So how do we make sense of these clashing perspectives?
Well, I think it's important to step back and look at the broader context. Uganda's legal system is a blend of British common law and traditional customary law, which can sometimes lead to conflicting interpretations.
So you're saying that this clash could be partly rooted in different understandings of how the law should be applied.
Exactly. And it also reflects a deeper tension between the executive branch of government, represented by the Attorney General, and the legal profession itself, represented by the ULS.
Like a power struggle playing out in the legal arena.
Precisely. And the outcome of this struggle could have a profound impact on the future of Uganda's legal system. If the Attorney General is able to consolidate his power and influence, it could lead to a weaker, less independent judiciary.
And what would that mean for the average Ugandan citizen?
If the courts are no longer seen as impartial arbiters of justice, people will lose faith in the legal system. It could lead to more corruption, less accountability, and a greater sense of lawlessness.
It's a chilling thought, to be honest, and it makes you realize just how fragile the rule of law can be, even in a country that has a relatively well-established legal system.
Absolutely. And this conflict is a stark reminder that the fight for justice and human rights is an ongoing battle.
Now, let's go back to the colonial legacy for a moment. You mentioned earlier that the ULS views the Attorney General's ex officio position on their council as a colonial hangover. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, during the colonial era, many African countries inherited legal systems that were designed to serve the interests of the colonial powers, not the people they were ruling over.
So they were essentially imposing their own legal systems on these countries without much regard for local traditions or customs.
Exactly. And one of the key features of these colonial legal systems was a very powerful attorney general who often acted as both a legal advisor to the government and a prosecutor.
So it sounds like the ULS sees the attorney general's current position as a vestige of that colonial past.
Yeah.
A system that needs to be reformed to ensure greater independence for the legal profession.
Precisely. They're arguing that having the Attorney General sit on the ULS Council creates a conflict of interest and undermines the ULS's ability to hold the government accountable.
So it's not just about the specific allegations of misconduct, but also about the broader structure of the legal system and how it might be perpetuating imbalances of power that were put in place during colonial times.
Exactly. And this raises a really important question for Ugandans. What kind of legal system do they want for their country? One that reflects their own values and aspirations, or one that's still clinging to the remnants of a colonial past?
That's a powerful question. And it's one that I think a lot of former colonies are grappling with as they try to build truly independent and just societies.
It's a process of decolonization, not just politically, but also legally and institutionally. And this conflict in Uganda is a prime example of how that process can play out in real time.
So where do we go from here? What are the potential outcomes of this legal battle? And what might it mean for the future of Uganda?
Well, one possibility is that the courts will step in and resolve the legal disputes, perhaps by clarifying the powers of both the ULS and the Attorney General.
So we could see a judicial ruling that sets some clear boundaries and hopefully restores some balance to the system.
Exactly. Another possibility is that this conflict could lead to political reforms. The ULS has called for a review of the legal framework governing the Attorney General's office, arguing that it needs to be updated to ensure greater accountability and transparency.
So this internal dispute within the legal profession could potentially trigger broader political changes.
It's certainly possible. It's already sparked a national conversation about the rule of law and the importance of an independent judiciary.
And it's fascinating to see how public opinion is playing out, because there seems to be a lot of support for the ULS, with many Ugandans expressing concern about these allegations of corruption and abuse of power.
Yeah, that public pressure could be a significant factor in how this conflict is ultimately resolved.
It really feels like we're at a crossroads here. What happens next could determine the course of Uganda's legal system for years to come.
It's a pivotal moment, and it's a reminder that the rule of law is not a given. It's something that has to be constantly defended and protected.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what are some key takeaways our listeners should keep in mind?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that even in countries with established legal systems like Uganda, there's always a risk of those systems being eroded or manipulated.
It's like a constant tug of war between those who want to uphold the rule of law and those who might be tempted to bend it to their own advantage.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have institutions like the ULS that are willing to stand up and speak truth to power, even when it's risky.
They're acting as watchdogs, making sure that the legal system serves the people and not just the powerful.
And this case also highlights how historical legacies like colonialism can continue to shape legal systems even decades after independence.
It's a reminder that the fight for true justice often involves confronting the ghosts of the past.
Absolutely. And for our listeners who are interested in learning more about this unfolding story, we encourage you to do your own research and stay informed.
You can find links to relevant articles and resources in our show notes.
And remember, justice is not a spectator sport. It requires active engagement and a willingness to hold those in power accountable.
Well said, Cypher. This has been a truly eye-opening deep dive into the heart of Uganda's legal system.
It's been a pleasure unpacking it with you, Big Dave.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on Legal Avenue Deep Dive. Stay curious and keep those legal minds sharp.
Little sweet slide.